Our next presentation is entitled #LookItUp, Millennials, Research and Writing, and our presenter is Jennifer Kunka. Jennifer is Professor of English and Director of the Writing Center at Francis Marion University. She earned her doctorate from Purdue University, where she served as the Assistant Acting Director of the Purdue University Writing Lab and developed content for the Purdue OWL. At FMU, Jennifer has taught a variety of courses, including composition, business and professional writing, and the rhetoric of new media. An active participant in IWCA, SWCA, and the 4 Cs, she has also published on Writing Center Theory and Practice, undergraduate research in technology and writing. Her current research interests are on writing centers, assessment, and retention. She is the co-author of the Prentice Hall Reference Guide in its 9th edition with Pearson, and the Writer's Facts in its 5th edition. In this presentation, Jennifer will discuss how composition instructors might adjust pedagogical practices to meet the informational needs of millennials, specifically by drawing upon their strengths: connectivity, interactivity, and skepticism. In this way, we can do more to help students dig past page rankings and determine the ethos, quality, and credibility of sources. I'm looking forward to your presentation. Jennifer, are you ready? Oh,
Jennifer? Hi, can you hear me?
I got you now.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Oh, excellent, good. Hi, thanks so much.
All right.
Let me minimize that. Can you see my slides okay, Amy?
Yeah, it looks great, Jennifer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me with you today, Amy, and thank you, Jean-Pierre. Thanks to Pearson for organizing this event, and thanks to all of you who are participating today in this event. I'm delighted to be here to talk a little bit about millennials research and writing, something I've thought a lot about as a director of a writing center, as well as someone who teaches composition and writing and thinks a lot about how students put together their ideas. So when I think about students today, students in technology, they have everything available at a click. I think about how much their practices have changed since I was a college student in the late 80s and early 90s, and even when I conducted research as a graduate student at Purdue in the late 90s. Sometimes I feel like I'm telling stories like my parents or grandparents would tell about going to school. You know, back when I was a student, we didn't ride the bus. We walked to school uphill in the snow, things like that. Except I'm saying back when I was a student, we didn't have library databases and apps. We went to the library and photocopied our magazine and journal articles, paying a nickel for every page. I feel like I sound a little like a cranky old lady. But for our contemporary students, research has never been more accessible. It's not a matter of finding information. There's more information available at their fingertips than ever before. But technology has really changed this current generation of students, who we might consider millennials, today aged between 13 and 32. And it's changed the way these millennials have viewed the research process. Every year, Beloit College posts that wonderful list of information about the coming fall's college freshmen. And in recent years, I'm struck with how many of them have never really known a time before the Internet. Think about it. Today's 18-year-old fresh person was born in 1995. Now, the Internet was commercially available in the early 1990s, and email was available about the same time. 2G digital networks for cell phones were established in the 90s. Flat-screen televisions were commercially available in 1997. Google came out of age in 1998 when millennials were only 3 years old. Ringtones, freshman persons were only 3 years old. Ringtones came out in 1998, and iPhones were released in 2007. That means for an 18-year-old, iPhones have been available for 1/3 of their lives. The technology landscape for millennials is rich and powerful, but it has also shaped the way they think about research and how they conduct it. So today, I'd like us to think a little bit about millennials research and writing. How do we as composition instructors approach research instruction and research writing with this group? We'll talk a little bit about who millennials are, what defines this generational group. We'll probe what place research writing has for this generation of students who indeed have grown up with everything they need to know, or at least they think they need to know, at their fingertips. And how can composition instructors play on and adapt to this generation's strengths, as well as provide their instructional needs? So who are the millennials? What do we mean by this term? Now, millennials is the name applied to the current generation of students. Pew Research Center has done a great deal of research into millennials, and they define different generations in this way. So I'm sure we've heard of the greatest generation, typically including people born before 1928. The silent generation was born between 1928 and 1945, defined by their conformist and civic instincts. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964, where we see that spike in birth rates after World War II. Generation X, born typically between 1965 and 1980. Pew Research defines them, and I'm included in this group, as savvy entrepreneurial loners. And millennials are the first to come of age in the new millennium. So in Pew Research Center's 2010 report titled Millennials, Confident, Connected, Open to Change, they delve into the habits and beliefs of this generation. So they find them to be a more ethnically and racially diverse group than previous generations. And I'm quoting here from the Pew Research report. They're less religious, less likely to have served in the military, and are on track to become the most educated generation in American history. Their entry into careers and first jobs has been badly set back by the Great Recession, but they are more upbeat than their elders about their own economic futures, as well as the overall state of the nation. Whether as a byproduct of protective parents, the age of terrorism, or a media culture that focuses on dangers, they cast a wary eye on human nature. 2/3 say you can't be too careful when dealing with people. Yet they are less skeptical than their elders of government. More so than other generations, they believe government should do more to solve more problems. So millennials are marked by a variety of things, but perhaps none more so than their online habits. Millennials strongly believe more than other generations that technology makes life easier and brings people closer to friends and family. They also have literally grown up with the internet. Indeed, many cannot remember a time before the internet. They believe technology, quote, allows people to use their time more efficiently. And they will find themselves expressing themselves in multiple ways on the internet. 75% have established social media profiles. And Pew Research's statistics on this are from 2010, so this number I would imagine might be a little higher now. Now 86% of college-educated millennials have social media profiles, Facebook, Twitter. 62% in 2010 reported using wireless internet, and 20% in 2010 have posted online videos of themselves. Now, I would imagine that this number has to be higher in 2013 as well. Apps like Vine and Snapchat, as well as advances in smartphone technology just in the last 3 years, have made this a much easier process. Today we have the selfie culture and the selfie reaction video, and I think those both contribute to students' use and millennials' use of video. Two quick stories. I was in my writing center the other day, and I saw one of my female tutors take out her phone. She pulled it back from herself, made an expression on her face like she was really excited and happy, snapped a picture, and then sent it to her friend. The whole thing took like 10 seconds. It was really fast. And I said, "What was that?" And she said her friend had just showed her an outfit she was wearing to a wedding, showed her through her phone. So she was reacting to it. I find this culture of reaction shots very curious. And one more story on this. I try to keep up with what my students are interested in. And a number of my students this past year reported to me that Pretty Little Liars is their favorite television show. This is a show that airs on ABC Family, and it's referred to as PLL, or hashtag PLL, because people frequently tweet about this particular show. So I've watched it. It's a dishy show about 4 female high school students who are friends with a 5th girl who disappeared during their slumber party one night. So the show weaves the story of this mystery around repeated harassing text messages and photos from a mysterious person who signs off her messages or his messages with the letter A. A seems to know all of their secrets and essentially bullies and blackmails the girls through the show. The big question is, who is A? At the end of last season, the show had an out-of-nowhere cliffhanger that was pretty shocking. My husband and I jumped on Twitter to read the reactions, and there were tons of self-posted videos of teenage girls reacting to the PLL finale. They filmed themselves watching the end of the show or recreated their reaction for the camera and posted it to the internet. Somehow this seemed to legitimize their feelings about what was happening. But in any case, these online videos certainly have, I would imagine, increased well beyond this 20% number that Pew Research came up with in 2010. We see a lot more of this now. In addition to these things, technology has created for millennials, quote, a new ecosystem for their social lives. More than half believe, quote, technology makes them, again, closer to friends and family. And it really has defined them in some ways in terms of how they use the internet. Mobile usage among this group is quite high, and 94% in 2010 were reported to have a cell phone. 83% of students reported, or millennials I should say, reported keeping their phones next to their beds, often as an alarm clock or for texting, what have you. Smartphone usage would also have to be quite high among this group. And certainly this group is a heavy texting group. It averaged 20 texts a day in 2010. And obviously this would be higher for some. But certainly online access is a defining characteristic for this generation. In fact, millennials are defined or self-defined by their, quote, technological exceptionalism. Millennials believe that they are exceptional in their use of technology, and more than 1 in 4 believe this indeed is the defining characteristic for their generation. Indeed, technology is integrated into their lives in a way that other generations don't use technology. It wasn't something new to learn. It was always there. It always formed part of their formal education, and it's woven into the fabric of their social lives. It's indispensable, and it's part of their normal. So while millennials are immersed in technology, are they really savvy about what they can do or how they use what they find? Another trait that has been applied to millennials is narcissism. Jean M. Twenge has argued this in books such as Generation Me and the Narcissism Epidemic, Living in the Age of Entitlement. She has found that millennials view themselves as, quote, above average, and millennials score higher on the narcissistic personality inventory. Other researchers have disputed Twenge, saying that millennials are confident, not narcissistic. But also other researchers' analyses into the measures of narcissism have disputed Twenge's results there too. But narcissism, confidence, let's think about it as confidence, or perhaps overconfidence. Maybe that is what, in some ways, undergirds millennials' approach to technology and the I think this is where composition instructors can do a lot to help millennials with information literacy. So in thinking about our discussion today, I have some observations. And what you see here on this slide is a photo I took from my campus's National Day on Writing event last year. In fact, we're having a similar event next Monday. I hope you're celebrating National Day of Writing coming up as well. So last year we invited the campus community to come out to a booth hosted by the Writing Center and our Sigma Tau Delta organization. We invited them out to the campus mall to celebrate writing. Students, staff, and faculty were invited to post a 6-word memoir, a haiku, or twitfic, which we defined as a story in 140 characters or less. The whole event was designed to help people celebrate writing, and we had a lot of visitors through the course of our day. Our tutors were great. They were out encouraging students walking by to participate and tell us their life stories in 6 words or less. That was really probably the favorite event of the day. I recall seeing 2 young men come up to the table. They wanted to write something on our sticky notes and post it to our board you see here, but they were thinking about how to compose their lines. After a little while, I saw them both typing into their phones and then writing down words. So I asked them what they were looking up, and one of them said he was checking how to spell a word. I said, oh, well, what do you use to check spelling with? And I was thinking that he'd be using dictionary.com or something like that. He said, oh, I'm just texting it. So basically, he was texting words he wanted to say and waiting for autocorrect to show him the correct spelling so he could write it down. Now, it just would not have occurred to me to do that with my phone if I wanted to know how to spell a word, but it was very natural for this individual. We as composition instructors might have all sorts of things to say about this, but let's think about this as a millennial. The situation posed a research question, didn't it? And the student responded very pragmatically to it. The student knows there is something he doesn't know. He needs to find the answer. He chooses the tool most expedient to him that will give him the quickest results, and he uses that tool to resolve his question. This gets at the millennial mindset about the use of technology. There are tools to help with a lot of aspects of research. Now, we have perhaps all heard or read about autocorrect fail situations where messages are sent with words misspelled in them. We might question this tool as the best choice for spelling accuracy, but making good choices about which tools to use and how to use them might be where comp instructors can guide students when it comes to research. Some to whom I have shared this observation asked the obvious and lamented, well, why doesn't this guy know how to spell? Why is he relying on technology at all for this knowledge? Well, this might have something to do with transactive memory. So transactive memory means the way information is stored within groups. So it's not that you do not need to remember everything. You need to remember who knows what and go to those people in order to find out whatever it is you need for a certain situation. So Wagner, Giuliano, and Hertel tested this theory on long married couples, and they found that the 2 people in a couple rely on each other to remember pieces of information that they both need. Now, let me give you an example. My husband and I both do a lot of our household chores. My husband is also an academic, and he is very smart. But when it comes to doing laundry, despite the many years we have been together and the many conversations we have had about this, he just can't remember how to operate the washer for different types of loads we wash. Now, I'm inclined to think he just doesn't want to remember this information because he doesn't want to do the laundry. But he points out to me there are things that he remembers that I don't, that he remembers for both of us. Like, he remembers how to connect up all the wires behind the TV set for the cable and the Blu-ray. And he relies on me to remember this stuff about the washer. He's like, this is transactive memory at work, dear. So transactive memory, Wagner, Giuliano, and Hertel suggests operates a little bit in this way. So for millennials today, Google and other search engines now operate as partners in transactive memory. Clive Thompson writes about this in his recently released book, Smarter Than You Think, How Technology is Changing Our Minds. You don't have to remember everything if you have a tool to help you remember it and you know how to access the tool. The key is knowing which tools to use and how to access them, and then knowing what to do with what you find. Now, Thompson also points out that permanent storage, for example, permanent storage in email, for example, I know in Gmail I just don't have to delete things anymore. My account just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Or people who save information from hard drive to hard drive as they get new computers and have these huge storage devices that can save all of their data for many years. You know, all of that information is stored. It is there somewhere. And so the idea of transactive memory here is that somewhere those pieces of memory are backed up, and it does affect the way people process and remember information. So millennials today operate in this kind of mind frame that there are other places that will remember things for them that they don't. So let me bring you to a second story, another observation about millennials. The other day I was working with one of my students. My student's task is to locate an opinion piece and analyze the argument presented within it. The student found a very interesting piece from the New York Times about one man's view of hipster culture. Cool, I thought. Good article. This is great. We start talking together about the writer's argument, and we read through some of the passages together. At one point, the student interrupted me to ask about a passage she'd just read. She asks, "What is a vinyl record?" So at this moment, I had a little bit of an OMG, I am super old feeling. After all, I had Michael Jackson's Thriller on vinyl when I was a teenager in the 1980s. But when I think about it from her perspective, what has been her history of accessing music? She said her mom had cassettes, but she had only ever had CDs or MP3s. She really didn't know what a vinyl record was. So what did I do to answer her question? Honestly, I was really surprised she didn't know that, and it took me a minute to think about this. So I opened up Google, typed in vinyl record, and clicked on images. Lots of pictures popped up. She said, "Oh, that's what those are. That's what, like, rappers use." And she gestured her hands back and forth the way rappers used to scratch records. So she finally did understand what that was, and it did awaken some memory of her and seeing something somewhere, but she had never dealt with this herself. Now, I use this observation to point out I use these tools too. I use these for teaching. I thought a picture would be the best way to communicate to her what the answer to her question was. I assumed she must have seen a vinyl record at some point in her past, and this would trigger her memory. But these tools I find are helpful for the moment of what. What is something? So that leads me to this point about research. For many students, research is piecing together available information, or information I should say, that's always available. It's always out there. What millennials want to know, they can look it up on Google, Wikipedia, whatever. They know the tools that are expedient and tell them what. I asked my own composition students about how often they look to answer something on the internet, and they said pretty universally that they ask questions into Google constantly. I mean, I do this too. I see some weird bug outside and put a description into Google. My refrigerator's making a weird noise. How do I fix it? I do these very same things. But sometimes, if we're looking for what, not why, we don't really get the depth of information that we need, and I think that's especially where students can get more help from composition instructors in adapting to this wonderful technology that's available to us. So if students are researching and researching on the surface, they often are looking for the answer to what. And I have to say, in my experience, students are pretty good about finding the answer to what. Again, they know the tools, Google, Wikipedia, that are going to tell them something about that. Whether they're always the best sources, of course, that's what we need to question. But they do struggle with getting more depth than this. Many researchers also point out that millennials are also the no child left behind generation. Did writing to answer questions on a test, but they didn't necessarily use writing to achieve deep learning about a topic. Kenneth Bernstein, a retired high school teacher, caused a stir in academic circles earlier this year with his article called "Warning from the Trenches" that was posted on the AAUP website. He pointed out that contemporary college students are used to answering questions for a test. They answer a lot of multiple choice questions, but they don't really get into the deep learning or critical thinking skills that students need today in college environments. Answering what is largely what students have been trained to do at this point, and so technology usage has certainly fallen in that category for them. So, third observation, back to Google and the cell phone. I found my research. Now, I direct the Writing Center at my university, and I also regularly tutor in the center. I meet students who are asked to engage in writing and research for various classes across the curriculum. I frequently see students grappling to go beyond what. Just this past week, I had 2 instances of this. First, I met with a student who was trying to get started with a ceremonial speech. She needed to choose a person, place, or event to commemorate. And she told me she wanted to do her speech on a female American leader, but she didn't really know who yet and wanted some help thinking about a topic. So we started doing some brainstorming about suffragettes and female reformers, and we went into Google and we looked at different websites about female activists. And after talking a bit, she chose an activist that she wanted to research. We then talked about where to find more information about the activist so she could learn more. And we found a museum dedicated to this individual and checked the website for more information. Once the student wrote down where to find this museum website, she then asked me, okay, now how can I make a metaphor about this person? Because this was one of the requirements for her speech. She had to include a metaphor. So I wanted to be sure she understood what a metaphor was, so we defined that, and then she wanted to go right into writing the metaphor down about her subject. And at that point I stopped her. I said, hold on, do you know anything about this person yet? No, not really. How can you create a metaphor if you don't have enough knowledge yet? You need to read. It was almost for the student as if location was enough. The source had been found. She knew how to go back to it. What she didn't know said. She had not worked out the points of analysis for her speech, and she really needed to dig further. And I think that's the step where we really need to spend more time as composition instructors. Now, I met a second student this week who had to find an academic article in her field and write a summary of it. She was confused about how to summarize. So when I met with her in our writing center, we talked about steps to take for summarizing. I asked her what the article was about that she had selected, and I was hoping to start a conversation there, get her talking so that we could start thinking about how she might organize her information. Well, the student admitted that she hadn't really read the article. She had skimmed through it, she said, and indeed things were highlighted through the article, but she hadn't really read it. So think about it. She found the article, she located a source, but the work of reading and analyzing had not happened. Summarizing obviously was going to be difficult to do because this exercise required her to dig into research, understand it, and follow it. She admitted this article was kind of long and she wasn't sure if she could read it all. I think this is where composition instructors can do more work. Teaching research is very important still. Do students know how to find a source? You know, when pressed, they do find things, not always the highest quality things, and I think that's something to talk about too, but they do find things. Those students have those tools. They aren't necessarily using the best tools to do what they need to do. And the job of reading and understanding, as well as evaluating, needs to continue. Now, in his book, The Filter Bubble, What the Internet is Hiding from Us, Eli Pariser discusses the ways personalization of online searches impacts the results users receive. This affects how students use those tools. Everything from your IP to the contents of your Gmail account affect the types of results you can get from Google. Sometimes this can prevent users from locating points of view as different from their own. Teaching students to be smart users of technology and smart users of the tools available to them, using search strategies and shortcuts on sites like Google that help them to narrow their searches and find quality information is incredibly important. Also, introducing students and being sure that they understand what library databases have to offer, that's also a very important strategy. I find for Google, one of my best tips, I think, for students is to use this keyword. When you're in the Google search, you can type site : S-I-T-E : and then immediately, without a space, type additional information about the type of website you would like to search. For example, I helped some students today locate some government information about childhood obesity. So we did : .gov/ space, and then childhood obesity in quotation marks. And it would only bring up information from government sources, .gov sources. That was a really, really helpful strategy so that they could find information from different types of sources. You can also use a longer search string. Like, for example, if you wanted to use cdc.gov, you could get information just from the Centers for Disease Control website. But that type of narrowing and then thinking about what web sources contain and the quality of manipulating Google in order to get what you need from Google could be helpful. Now, I do want to talk momentarily about habits of mind. Certainly the Framework for Success in Post-Secondary Writing, published in 2011 by the WPA and CTE and the National Writing Project, outlines 8 habits of mind that are important for post-secondary writing. And I think the first 2 are millennial strengths: curiosity, desire to know more about the world; openness, willingness to consider new ways of being and thinking in the world, according to this document. I think millennials have strength there. They want to know more. They're open to learning about the world. They're open to new ideas. And that's a strength we should play on when it comes to research. The others, engagement, the sense of investment and involvement in learning, according to the Framework for Success. Creativity, generating, investigating, and representing ideas. Persistence, the ability to sustain interest in and attention to short and long-term projects. Responsibility, ability to take ownership of one's actions and understand consequences of those actions. Flexibility, ability to adapt to situations, expectations, or demands. And metacognition, the ability to reflect on one's own thinking as well as on the individual and cultural processes used to structure knowledge. These are helpful for thinking about how we might approach millennials in the classroom in relation to research. I think particularly about creativity, being creative in terms of thinking about how we find research, using different strategies for locating things perhaps besides just Google, thinking about different strategies for blending primary and secondary sources. I also believe persistence is important here, building a short or a long-term project and seeing it through to completion. That's very important in terms of research because research is not a quick process. It takes time. It takes time to read that 12-page article. It takes time to read 8 of those and to synthesize that information together in order to have that information supplement your point of view. So digging deeply into some of these can also help us think about how students approach writing. The Framework for Success in Post-Secondary Writing also looks at elements of research writing, as you can see on this slide. Again, I think it's incredibly important for instructors to think about how we show students to evaluate sources and make those strategic decisions about sources. What kinds of sources are effective for writing? I know in the past I've had students bring up what we might call the content farm websites, the websites that have the short article about some hot topic of the day surrounded by advertising. You know, the goal of that website is not to provide information about the topic from the goodness of the hearts of the people who put out that website. They really want you to look at that advertising or at least click on their site so they get the advertising revenue that's from the sites posted on that page. You know, that's the sort of thing I think we can do a lot with in terms of showing students what the difference is between a quality source and a rigorous source and a surface source. I also think we can do a lot with thinking about critical research skills in terms of reading and comprehension. Not just, you know, composition isn't just about composing, and I think that's what sometimes, you know, the idea of reading and understanding is what gets lost in that umbrella of composition. Having students understand what they read, critically engage with those sources is important. And I think reading longer materials, longer than what you might find on a simple web page, can be a really good exercise in thinking about how they might develop their own lengthy, sustained arguments as well. Now, the WPA outcome statement also points to some of these elements in terms of what students should be able to do after they complete composition: locate, evaluate, organize, and use research material collected from electronic sources, understand and exploit differences in the rhetorical strategies and in the affordances available for both print and electronic composing processes and text. This again kind of gets to that idea of how reading might be important and evaluation might be central to how we help millennials transition between finding what and thinking about why, how we might dig further. The goals of first-year composition by the WPA outcome statement also focus on things like inquiry, again, finding, evaluating, analyzing, and synthesizing sources, and integrating with ideas with their own, with those of sources. Those are particularly important, I believe, for students and something that we can work with in terms of research. So what does this mean for the traditional research process? You know, I've laid out here on this slide some of those steps that we often ask students to take when it comes to research: finding the topic, narrowing it down, thinking about research questions, locating those sources, reading, comprehending, and evaluating sources. So important. Thinking about their own point of view on the topic, and then integrating those sources responsibly into the project. I find that even though millennials are wired, wireless, connected, using tools, it doesn't mean that they come simply to these aspects of research. I mean, they can find things, they can find sources, but they often don't find the right sources or the best sources. Web articles are often very short. They might not be credible. They require evaluation. And I do find, as a composition instructor, a strategy that can be effective is having students dig further into longer, more complex articles, or even a book, to model how another writer goes about this process. Frequently in my own research writing class on my campus called Writing for Disciplines, I have my students read a nonfiction book that contains a sustained argument. And I typically pick something with a topic that is appealing for students from multiple different disciplines, and they can then branch off from our initial examination of this topic into looking at other things that they're interested in, using perhaps what we look at, that book, for a model. In the past, I've used things like Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation and Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat. More recently, I've been using Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point and Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler's Connected: How Your Friends' Friends Affect Everything You Feel, Think, and Do. It's about networking and how networks influence behavior and what causes people to make decisions and actions the way they do. So very often when I assign such a book, my students tell me this is the first nonfiction book they've ever read. And they have really ever read, that they've read all the way through. Certainly they've had textbooks and things of that nature before, but not necessarily a sustained argument in this way. So having them dig a little bit into these sources can be helpful. And it serves as an effective model. Now, when we talk about research processes, we certainly can think about strength and connectivity. Students are wired in. They can use outlets to find information. They're already interactive. They're connected to social networks. They can find information from other people, from sources, from people that they are connected to, and conduct interviews. But they're also skeptical, and that, I think, is to our benefit as instructors. They can use the skepticism to be critical of source material. And by playing on these three traits, we can really help them develop their research strategies. So what do I do in my classes? I have them play detective. I'm constantly emphasizing detective skills when we think about research. In my classrooms, tech tools are at work in class. Cell phones are out on the desk, and we use them for inquiry. I have my students look things up all the time to contribute to our class discussions. Recently, my students in my Writing for Disciplines class, they were talking about editorials we had read recently about the Syria situation that the United States was confronting. And many times through that discussion, my students used their phone to look up some of the references made by these writers. I was teaching them how to be more critical in thinking about what they read. We then watched parts of Obama's speech on Syria, and by watching that video, we then used that video as an example to analyze his argumentative strategies. We talked about health issues recently, and during class, one of the students mentioned that their parent was a health professional and they would ask their parent a particular question. I said, get out your phone and text your mom or dad and let's find out what they have to say about this. And that's a way for them to use their tools in class. And in my literature class, I have students use their phones to look up vocabulary, look up people mentioned in what we read, get the context for information that they read. We do that constantly. But I figure, why fight the tech tools? The tech tools are there. The students use them. They are part of their everyday lives and fabric. Let's use them to our advantage and use them to enrich in a conversation that we might be having. In my classes, we do group searches through databases in Google. We evaluate sources together. We look at videos together. If a student finds a link to something, I'll put it up on our screen and our speakers, and we'll look at it together. Now, I have to say, this kind of research and class activity used to be prohibitive for me. My students are not necessarily wealthy, and we're not a laptop campus. Everyone doesn't have a computer. But you know what? Almost all of my students have a smartphone, and they do, in that essence, have a computer in their hands. They can do quite a lot with that phone, and they enjoy getting them out in class and using them. I want them to use their tools to find information, but also be critical of what they use and access. I want also focus on information literacy. What kinds of information are out there? How do you read what you see? And I also pay attention to social and civic literacy. I want them to have the context to understand what they're reading about, especially when it comes to current events. We will pull up news sites. I'll have them pull up news sites on their phone so that they can read a little bit about a topic that we're discussing. I put a lot of emphasis on comprehension of source material. Do you understand what you read and see? Can you summarize it? What is the rhetorical situation of what you're reading and seeing? Those questions of rhetorical situation permeate through every type of media that we examine. And then we spend some time analyzing both the tools and the resources that they use. What kinds of tools are they using? Are they using the best tools for what they need to do? Is Google the best place to get the information on this particular idea? Are you looking at the right tool for whatever it is you're trying to do? Is autocorrect the way to check spelling? Things of that nature. Could YouTube be valuable? Let's think about that. So I do think about this a good bit. I also, and to kind of wrap things up, how do we share results? I encourage my students to do projects that connect student writers with an audience, put students in conversation with each other. In the past, I've had students create websites, create webzines, create blogs. This has worked best when I've been in a computer classroom. But even with things like Blackboard and a discussion board, that's a great way to get students involved and interactive with each other. These have utility beyond class. I also want them to think about assignments that are multimodal, beyond the research paper, pictures, graphs, charts, and more. And I want them to think a lot about problem solving and argumentation, critical skills that we need in our workplaces today. I do believe purpose-driven research paper assignments still have a place in the writing curriculum. They give students a chance to focus their research and articulate their views on a topic. This can then help them branch into another type of medium or argument. I'll give you a quick example. I had students focus on current events types topics and write a synthesis paper in which they combined resources from multiple locations to develop a discussion about what a problem was, what were the causes behind that problem, and how people suggested solving it. One of my students chose to write her paper on sex trafficking, and she learned a lot about sex trafficking and specifically what health workers need to do in order to spot signs of sex trafficking in potential visitors to emergency rooms or doctors' offices. For my second assignment related to that project, I gave students the option to write a solution paper, the traditional solution argument, or to do another type of multimodal project. This student chose to create a video and then write a reflective paper about the types of choices she made in creating that video, showing how nurses might identify the signs that someone was a victim of sex trafficking when they came into an emergency room. And it was a really fascinating video. I didn't have to spend time showing the student how to make a video. She already knew that. And I can't say in the past it's always been true, but with cell phones and the technology available to record information, it really has made it possible for students to use technology tools in a way that is intuitive to them. So she created this video, and it was really pretty effective. But this type of project can have practical use in a medical field. It could have practical use for nursing students, and that was something I really liked about that project. It has utility beyond her class assignment, and I think that's the best way to approach research writing. I think I have talked a while, so I think I will stop there and see what kinds of questions we have. I do want to say, thinking about critical thinking, problem solving, writing beyond the research paper are all very important, I think, for our professional workplaces. And we want students who graduate college and can find information and analyze and process information to develop new ideas and address challenges. Think about solving problems. That's what I encourage my students to do, and I hope the way that we work with millennials helps them to bridge what they know about technology already with what they can do in their futures. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll toss it back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And these are just great ideas. There's so much great information here. I really appreciate you putting together this this very detailed PowerPoint. I was thinking, and there's been a couple questions along this line. What would you say to someone who maybe feels like that there's something a little bit destabilizing, if not threatening, about standing in front of the class and encouraging their engagement with technology, knowing or suspecting maybe that they are A, more tech savvy than you are, and that B, they might be, that among the sources they might be coming up with while you're talking might be sources that would contest something that you're saying and could sort of become disruptive of your kind of flow in that way. What are some of your thoughts?
I think there's a risk, right? When you bring in all these sources and all of this information into a discussion, there's a risk that you're not all in control of the discussion. But I welcome that. If there's something that students find that contests what I have to say, I have found my class this semester in particular will tell me. and we'll talk about it, and we'll look, if we need to, we'll pull up their research on the screen and take a look at its credibility and what it has to say. As far as being comfortable with the tech tools, I have to say I think it is a good idea as a composition instructor to get into a little bit of what our students do. Like, I really consciously try to find out how students access the internet. I ask questions of my students and my tutors all the time. What are the tools you're using, and how do they work for you? And I certainly want to encourage them to select tools that are effective, that are credible and knowledgeable, and I certainly emphasize that in my classes. But I do recognize that I don't know everything. I'm not a Snapchat user. I had to learn about that from my students. But I think that's part of the joy of the classroom. I'm a student in some ways too, and I think my willingness to admit that and know that I don't know everything about technology, that there might be things that they're more intuitive with than I am, helps to make our conversations better. That I'm willing to show what I know, and they're willing to show what they know, and I value what they know too.
It's interesting. There's so much resonance between what you're saying and some of the earlier sessions. That kind of a theme of the conference that's emerging is this this kind of idea that that students are changing, teaching is changing, and it's offering all of these opportunities for us to become knowledge seekers and to really to engage differently with our students, in part by enacting some critical thinking and inquiry-based skills and honing our own skills, but also in part from learning from the literacies and the tools that students are bringing. to the class.
I think that's true. I mean, they are certainly knowledgeable about the what searches, and I feel like I play on that strength for them. They can find out what, and even if I know what, I sometimes ask them if they know what. You
Sure.
know, where is Syria? Let's look that up. And they do,
Yeah.
you know, and that's
Yeah.
good. I think that's a good modeling strategy. You know, I know these things, but you don't, but I'm going to see if you can find out where those answers are. But I do think
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
some gaps in what they do bring to the classroom. One thing, I'm just going to bring this up on the slide here, that I've been thinking a lot is what I got out of my high school education that helped me think about how to be a problem solver. This is very geeky, but when I was in high school, I was on a team called Future Problem Solvers of America.
Oh boy.
I know. And now it's an organization called Future Problem Solving Program International. And actually there are sites at many schools across the country where teams will get together and they'll receive a scenario, like some problem that's happening in the United States or in the world. And they have to go through the 6-step process listed here in order to think about how they would solve it. And so I think about this as a strategy I wish my students had a little more of, the ability to be critical about a problem and the information that they find, and then especially develop criteria to measure the effectiveness of a solution. And having criteria by which you evaluate things, even evaluate sources, and going through that process, I think is so important for students. And that's one thing I feel like they miss a little bit that I can give them more of as a composition instructor. And I just remember this from high school as being really formative for me in terms of how I thought about myself as a problem solver. And I do try to pass this on now to students a little bit in some way so that when they're solving problems for assignments and projects for my classes, that they have some guidance in terms of how to do those critical thinking skills that I feel they need more of. But this is what was interesting to me back in the day when I was a super geek high school kid. but certainly I think has shaped me in some ways that I think
Sure.
is helpful.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally agree with you. I think that's and I think this is also kind of an interesting thing that that is emerging in classroom practice too, is this idea of a problem-solving space and creating an environment for inquiry and critical thinking and problem solving and all those terms that kind of slide around and bump into each other a lot. And but you know, it's interesting to think about consciously implementing some of those things and making writing more about problem solving and asking students to see research as a problem-solving kind of engagement as well.
Exactly.
So.
I think it makes research feel a little more practical and less as a classroom activity. And indeed, when students get into a professional environment, I believe that's what they're being asked to do many times. We have a problem. How do we solve it? Well, we need to get some information so we know what to do or what has been done before or what guides our decision making. Those types of steps are important for students, and they're also important for professionals that they'll become.
And you know, and it's interesting that that you say that too, because I mean, for a lot of us, you know, who enjoy research and have kind of gravitated into academia, in part because that's something that that interests us and keeps us feeling alive. There is that sense that it's an adventure, that you're discovering something or solving something that's worth digging into, and it takes it beyond that surface meaning and makes it, you know, a little more of a personal quest and a lot more exciting.
I agree, and I certainly want whatever students research to be something that they have interest in. I pretty much let them choose their topics when we get into research projects, though I give them some parameters and some guidance about how to do that and how to narrow their topics if they're too broad. But I find that if they are looking at something they're engaged in and they're interested in, if I can form an assignment that allows them the latitude to explore something they're interested in, but then kind of guide it toward offering some kind of solution to make a dent in a problem, if not completely resolve it, that makes them more engaged too. I don't want them to be bored.
Exactly, exactly. And it yields up better projects so that you're not, so that you're not bored reading them. I mean, that's
well,
another part of it
exactly,
too.
that too. That too. I will read no matter what, but I
That's right.
certainly want
That's
them to be excited about what they're doing.
Exactly. Jennifer, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm so
Thank you
thankful.
so much. And thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you again, Amy.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. Our next session will be reimagining the rhetorical situation with Sid Dobrin. So we'll take a short break and be right back with Sid. Thanks, everyone.